Welcome everyone to another Jackson Securities webinar. I'm Lachlan Kelleher from Fordham Wealth, and I'm joined by Stefano Marani from Renergen, CEO. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're very grateful for having you, obviously from South Africa, joining us. It's a very late afternoon at the moment in Sydney, but how's it this morning in South Africa?
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, lovely, beautiful, beautiful. As always, ladies and gentlemen, we'll do our questions at the very end. We've already got a few submitted in, so if you do have any questions, please just submit that at the end. We'll run through those for you. As always, this is for research purposes only and should not be consumed as any sort of advice at all. And in saying that, we'll just start getting through it. So thanks, Stefano, we'll start getting away.
Great, thank you. And let me just apologize for my tardiness. We were having some IT issues with the firewall, but eventually got it right. So sorry about that. Sorry, wrong way. All right, so let me just move that little thing over there. In a nutshell, for those of you that don't know what we are, we were actually, funnily enough, the world's first listed helium company. We listed in 2015. And prior to that, believe it or not, there were absolutely no helium companies listed anywhere on planet Earth. Now they seem to be all the rage. We have a dual listing, one on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and one on the ASX. And the primary asset that we hold is in South Africa in a project that we call the Virginia Gas Project. It's the site that was created by some really freak geological and cosmological occurrences. Essentially an asteroid laid the foundation for a setting which at the moment has probably what's on record as the highest average concentration of helium on planet Earth, sitting at an average of over 3%, where if you had to compare that to say the United States is sitting at about 0.35% on aggregate across all of the different fields. So it's quite a helium rich field, but it's also got commingled with the gas a very pure form of methane. And now, as a result of this discovery, we've embarked on the construction and completion of the first phase of the Virginia Gas Project, which now sees us as being the first and only onshore producer of LNG in the country. And South Africa is now the 8th country in the world to start exporting helium. The first project was a proof of concept, and that's now led us on to the point where we're going back for the main event, which is the second phase, and that we announced earlier this year as being a $1.16 billion project. All right, so at a glance, we've got world-class helium reserves. We're currently the only holder of a petroleum production right in South Africa. Now, just not to belabor this point too much, I think everyone that's been outside of South Africa looking in can see some of the challenges that we face, which are not unique to South Africa, but we've got a special breed of problems over here at multiple levels. We were the recipient of the first and only onshore petroleum production right in South Africa, 2012. There have been a number of other prospects. Some are listed, some are not listed. Everyone's looking for gas, some have found gas. But despite the fact that gas has been discovered, from 2012 until 2023, we still remain the only licensed petroleum production. Just bear that in mind. It's not a straightforward process to get the government to actually give you a production right, and that means that we've got a massive first mover advantage compared to anyone else looking to try and develop this space. We've got obviously a very, very large base of helium and very high purity helium, which means that because the concentration is so high, it's very, very low cost for us to extract it to produce. And right now in the world where helium is in short supply, it means that we've got significant tailwinds behind us. That combined with the double whammy of South Africa having massive energy issues, we're bringing on a new source of energy online and a transition fuel online at a time where South Africa is struggling not only from an energy perspective, an energy security perspective, but also we're one of the most pollutive economies in the world when you compare it on a carbon dioxide per dollar of GDP produced. So this has a double whammy from that perspective. There are 4 pillars to our business model. LNG, so LNG to industrial users, and examples of this are our current customer base being Consol, who manufacture glass bottles for the Budweiser, for the Anheuser-Busch Budweiser group. And then another customer is Italtal, the largest manufacturer of ceramics on the continent. And so that's literally just the case of buying in LNG, transporting it by road, and then using it for thermal purposes in their applications. Liquid fuel substitution, we're pioneering in South Africa the rollout of LNG fuel stations on the major highways for trucks. 2 benefits of it. One, running a truck on LNG as opposed to diesel is significantly cheaper, but it's also significantly lighter carbon footprint. And so our customers are benefiting from significant improvements in their sustainability, while at the same time also saving money in the process. So that's the second key pillar under LNG. And then during phase 2, which is a project scheduled to turn on back end of 26, beginning of 27, that will have a major gas to power component of it as well, which, as you can just hear here, doing a hybrid gas solar would see a reduction in overall greenhouse gas emissions of 80% relative to the local utility over here. So there's a massive feel-good green angle to this as well. And then the 4th business pillar that we have is obviously helium, and helium over here we have multiple strategies. We sell to the wholesalers, as well as in some cases actually selling directly to customers, and we do this by virtue of the fact that we have on our second phase project a number of helium ISO containers, so we can deliver direct to customers. I talk about phase 1 and phase 2. This is in a snapshot what it looks like. Phase 1, which is the project that we've just built, its nameplate capacity is up to 350 kilograms of helium per day, 2,700 gigajoules of LNG per day, and depending on where the FX is, it costs about $60 million to build. The phase 2 project is the project that we're turning on later in 26, 27. That's 4,200 kilograms of helium per day, which will be somewhere between 6 to 8% of the entire world's helium supply. 34,400 gigajoules of LNG per day, which in metric tons is about 680 to 700 metric tons of LNG. And that will come at a cost of $1.16 billion. The sources and uses of this funding. Phase 1 was funded by the US government on the basis that helium is a strategic commodity. And so we got a loan from the US government of about $40 million to put towards phase 1. And phase 1 was a proof of concept for the United States government. The theory being build a small pilot project. If you can get the small pilot project built, then we'll go through the credit process for phase 2. And the DFC, who is a part of the US government, is a state-owned entity, is going through their final motions of their credit to provide us with $500 million of funding towards the second phase. We've got one of the big local banks, Standard Bank, who's come to the table offering us an additional $250 million worth of debt. Both of these loans are 12 years door-to-door, 3 years grace with concessionary interest rates. Well, the local bank funding isn't concessionary. The government funding is concessionary. And then in terms of equity for the project, we've got the Central Energy Fund, which is a state-owned entity here in South Africa, which owns all of the country's energy assets outside of Eskom. They have a strategic interest in taking a stake. And so they're going to be investing $55 million for a 10% stake of the Virginia gas project, leaving Renergen holding the remaining 90%. This incidentally also qualifies for BEE, and so it satisfies all of our BEE requirements. And then we've got a NASDAQ IPO, which we have already announced. And so the NASDAQ IPO, we're anticipating coming online back end of Q3, beginning of Q4 of this year for the NASDAQ IPO. We've done a lot of exploration in the meantime, and just to put numbers into perspective, you'll see a lot of prospective resources doing the rounds on competitors. And let me just say, I mean, competitor is a bad word in the helium space. It's in such short supply. There are no real competitors. Basically, anyone that can produce helium should be coming online. But just so that everyone compares like for like, You've got proven, which is your P's. Then you've got contingent, which is your C's. And then you've got your prospective, which are your U's. So your U's are your P's plus your C's. Now, there's no point in us showing our C's or our U's because those numbers are just gargantuan. They're absolutely horrifically large. No one else to date has actually published a P in the helium space. We're the only company in the world that has genuine 1P and 2P reserves. Everyone else only has prospective resources. To put the numbers into context, our methane is about 0.4 TCF or 400 BCF of methane, which while that is it's not a gargantuan amount of methane, you have to appreciate that in South Africa, we're selling our gas in a range of between 14 and 20 US dollars per gigajoule. So while it may not be a very big amount, the margins that we enjoy are pretty significant. On the helium side over here, you'll see that the 2P helium numbers are a gargantuan 13.6 billion cubic feet. To put that in context, the BLM auctioned 1 BCF of helium underground in 2018. This is for gas that still needed to be brought to the surface, and that helium was auctioned off at $286 million per BCF. So 13.6 BCF is a very large number. This is the production, right? The blue polygon is our total area, which is 87,000 hectares, or roughly 460,000 acres. The P's are contained within the yellow polygon in the middle, and that only represents about 14% of our total reserve. The contingents of to the north and the south are prospective to the east and the west, and every single red dot over there has been assessed as a high likely potential reservoir for drilling into. What's interesting is that you'll notice that there's more red in the contingent than there is in the reserve, and the reserve only covers about 14% of the total production right that we have. So all in all, we're pretty optimistic that that phase 2 is not where the Virginia gas project is. There's significant potential upside, in our opinion, as to what this project really can produce in the long run. I mentioned before, how did the gas get there? A combination of biology and astronomy. Essentially, about 2 billion years ago, the largest asteroid ever to have hit the planet struck in what's now known today as Ventersdorp. That created a massive crater about 350 kilometers in diameter, and that set in motion of events which basically created the perfect platform for bacteria to develop. And that bacteria is still alive and active underground and producing methane as we speak, which is why our wells are a little unique in the sense that we've had wells that were drilled in 1957 and they're producing more gas today than they did in 1957. We have wells. In fact, most of the wells tend to increase as time goes on. And we don't get recognition for this. We assume in our reserve statements that all of the wells follow a completely normal decline curve, and that we have to do 5% worth of infill drilling every single year. You'll see in the bar chart in the bottom left over there what we look like from a concentration perspective relative to the other helium producing countries in the world. That's not to say that there aren't individual projects with concentrations higher than an average of 3.4%. With this, the only production right in South Africa means that in this chart, this is pretty much what South Africa is going to look like from a concentration perspective to the others. So, in a nutshell, helium is essentially what lithium was about 10 to 15 years ago. Very high growth commodity, extremely strong demand, very limited substitute capabilities. The US supply dropped from around 80% of world supply down to under 50%. It's very rare. It's only found in a few fields in the world. Concentrations vary between 0.01% and 0.5%. And we are strategically located here in South Africa. Cape of Good Hope was set up as a trading post because of its ease of access to all four corners of the globe. This is important in helium because helium only transports well for 45 days by ship. Now, if you're moving helium from Qatar to Shanghai, it takes 44 days. It's not ideal. South Africa is the only country in the world where you can reach all 4 corners of the globe, and you can get there in under 32 days, which means that we've got a strategic advantage in terms of how quickly we can get helium to market. And being slap bang in the middle of the country, we've got access to all 9 ports at approximately the same amount of time. So the ability for us to move helium around the world is quite impressive relative to some of the other helium projects. We're the first and only onshore LNG production facility. South Africa can't import LNG for many reasons. Happy to take questions on that. But basically, South Africa isn't going to be importing LNG soon. We only get our gas through a pipeline from Mozambique, and it's also been stated that the pipeline has run out of gas. And so that pipeline will probably be shut down by about 2028, 2029, which means that we've just got additional demand for the product, which is a good thing from a pricing perspective. So all in all, we've had some phenomenal tailwinds in the project. For those of you that don't know what helium's primary uses are, obviously MRI is big, but MRI is diminishing as people start to find more efficient ways to cool down the magnet. We still need helium in the MRI, and the old MRIs are still using as much helium as they were before. Manufacturing new MRIs that are reducing. So ironically, while MRIs are using less helium, MRI growth in terms of the usage of helium is still growing as an asset by about 3% per annum. And this is analogous to electricity. People thought that the minute that that appliances would become more efficient, electricity consumption would come down. No, it's not true. More appliances are being bought faster than ever before, and so while they're more efficient, but more of them using the same amount of power. It's the exact same analogy with MRIs. So the MRI market is still growing. Welding is the one area that is going to take a hit because of the current shortages, and so people are using various substitutes for welding. Other is the aerospace industry. So that's rockets, that's basically anything that goes into space, that as well as nuclear. So it's ballistic missiles, it's nuclear weapons. There's an entire defense force angle around helium too, which is why it was declared. And then obviously the biggest single growth market at the moment is electronics and the manufacture of semiconductors. So we'd all be aware of the recent crisis in the semiconductor space. I think some of us would have all seen the recent passing of the $500 million bill in the United States to start manufacturing semiconductors in the US as opposed to Taiwan. This has basically doubled the amount of helium being consumed in the manufacture of these semiconductors, and you cannot make a semiconductor without helium. There's absolutely no substitute for it. Well, there is a substitute, but it's about 100 times more expensive, so that's not feasible. Which means that that helium in the electronic space is going to be around for a very, very long time to come. And that's between that and Musk's endeavors. Those are the 2 single biggest growth drivers in the helium market right now. Which is just putting further strain on an already massively constrained market due to supply shortages. Helium market is controlled by the companies on the left. 98% of all of the world's helium is distributed by these companies. And then the end users, these are some of the end users on the right-hand side. Some of the end users on the right-hand side already either have direct contracts from them or are reaching out to us to bypass the middlemen, and that's part of our business plan, is basically coming in as a complete disruptor to the industry and going direct to customer, as opposed to having the wholesalers on the left take absolutely no risk in the upstream or midstream and simply buy helium and then pass it on to people on the right. And that's where the biggest opportunity here. But in order to do that, you have to be able to produce liquid helium, not gases. Otherwise, you won't be able to do it. In terms of our green credentials, for those of you that are interested, concentration is everything. For every single 1 ton of helium that you have to produce, or that you produce, there is an associated amount of LNG that comes out the ground. And for every 1 ton of LNG, you produce approximately 2.2 tons of CO2. And so just on a straight outright comparison, every 1 ton of helium that we produce with our concentrations, we're coming in at 469 tons of CO2. Whereas if you had to take a look at someone like Qatar, every 1 ton of helium that Qatar produces, they are producing 29,300 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. So while right now no one really cares about green helium or environmentally friendly helium, the fact of the matter is that in time this will start to become more of an issue. I touched on the fact that the LNG market in South Africa is particularly constrained. We've got major issues. You can see over there the big pipeline coming in from the Panda and Tamane fields, which go via Maputo into Secunda to feed Sasol. This pipeline is now constrained. Gas is starting to run out, and so we see a situation, by Sasol's own admission, by 2020, 2028, that will severely curtail production in the pipeline. And there's a question as to whether or not Sasol is actually just going to keep all of the gas themselves for what's left. That pipeline produces about 220,000 gigajoules of gas per day, just for Johannesburg. Our phase 2 is 34,000 gigajoules. Even with the current demand that we have for customers that aren't on the pipeline, we're going to have an additional pent-up demand of a further 220,000 gigajoules coming online by the time that phase 2 is operational. So we see significant tailwinds for upward pricing pressure, which means that we're fairly confident that we're going to maintain, if not increase, the prices at which we can sell gas for. And I made the comment earlier, importation of LNG into South Africa is not possible. The ports aren't deep enough, and the legislation hasn't been drafted in order for us to be able to gas supply. There's a long way to go before South Africa is going to be importing LNG from anyone. With regards to domestic distribution of LNG, it's a simple conversion to the truck. You put a tank on the side, you put an ECU on the kit, an ECU kit on the truck, and the truck runs on a blend of both diesel and LNG. And obviously there's significant greenhouse gas reduction emissions while actually being significantly cheaper. The beauty about the country is that it's very, very easy for us to cover all the major highways in South Africa with very few filling stations. So a filling station in Colesberg, which is halfway between Cape Town and Bloemfontein. 2 filling stations in Johannesburg, 1 in Durban, 1 in East London, and then 1 halfway between Pretoria and Durban. And you pretty much have the entire country mapped out with a total addressable market of about 60,000 trucks across the highway. Now, phase 2, if we had to put all of the gas into the trucks, we're not anticipating supplying more than, say, 3,500 trucks. So we're a very, very small fraction of what the total demand is in the trucking industry. So without harping on for too much longer, I will stop sharing the screen there, and then we can go into Q&A. I try to go through it quite quickly so that we can go.
No, very, very well done. No, I think it has answered a few little questions that people have been wondering. More or less, there's one that just keeps reoccurring and we're being asked previously as well, is what's the update of the current Linden container being filled? It's been there for ages. So there's a lot of questions with regards to that. Do we have any particular understanding of what's going on, or what's the plan for right ahead?
So with regards to that, to the containers coming on and leaving, those are under NDA. So deliveries of helium, we're never going to announce when helium is leaving the plant or when containers are being switched out. So I wouldn't go holding my breath waiting for any announcements or any updates on that. That is under NDA between us and the customer.
Lovely, thank you. How will the engaging Worley help with the delivery of phase 2 in a timely manner?
So Worley, obviously, in our opinion, is one of the preferred, is the preferred supplier over here from the owner's engineer perspective. And Worley's involvement with us will be acting as our independent owner's engineer, overseeing the EPC contracts. So they'll be ensuring that schedules are adhered to, they'll be overseeing QA, QC, and just basically making sure that from a project management perspective, they'll be essentially our external project management company managing the entire construction.
Excellent. When will the phase one reach enough capacity to allow the auction of helium to the spot market?
That will probably be, I'd say, end Q4, beginning Q1 next year.
Yeah, excellent. And obviously, you touched on with regards to phase two, the loan period. We have a very eagle-eyed viewer saying that obviously the loan period is a 3-year grace period of loans for phase two, meaning it will need to be operational by 2026. Is this the plan?
Yeah, so phase two, and sorry, the signal wasn't great, but yeah, we're anticipating that phase two is going to be operational by back end of 2026. We'll start drawing down on the loans for the phase two transaction, probably sometime towards the middle of Q3 this year. That's when all of the construction in earnest starts kicking off.
Yep.
And the phase two loan is a 3-year grace with a 9-year payback.
Yeah, lovely. We have a few questions with regards to obviously geopolitical news as well. Obviously, we have US and China with the being a bit heated at the moment. The semiconductor chip war is definitely brewing over in Taiwan at the moment. Any thoughts on how this may impact Renergen and helium demand, as it is critical for semiconductors?
Look, for us, this has been a major tailwind. Think about it this way. Yeah, you've got South Africa geographically right in the middle of China and the US. Then you've got South Africa as a country being part of the BRICS, which means that it's obviously closely aligning itself with China as a nation. However, we've, as a company, we've been funded by the United States government, and we're obviously working closely with the United States government. Which means that from our perspective, we find ourselves in a very comfortable position working with the United States government as the chip Act, what they call the CHIPS Act, starts to see these new production facilities coming online, and all of them being predominantly being constructed between Ohio and Austin in Texas. You'll start to see a significant amount of helium being consumed in that area relative to other parts of the United States. And so we find ourselves neatly within this corridor where we can get helium from Cape Town to Houston in 11 days with 50 ISA containers, setting up a neat little storage facility, ideally somewhere in Texas, probably either Brownsville or somewhere around there, setting up an onshore liquid helium storage facility. And then from there, Bob's your uncle. It's not very far to get it up to Austin or into Houston, where a lot is already being consumed. And then you've got a number of other mega users not too far away from Brownsville that would also be massive helium consumers. So I see the geopolitical situation is actually favoring us, simply by virtue of the fact that America is going through a major helium crisis. The BLM is going to suffer outages for a very, very long time to come. The sale of the BLM has not been thought through properly. So while the Helium Stewardship Act forces the sale of the Cliffside refinery, what they did was that the law of unintended consequences, they set up 2 separate sales contracts. One asset for sale is the helium gas contained within the BLM, and then the second asset for sale is the refining and the wells up above ground. And there is absolutely no requirement in the sales agreement for the upstream equipment for the plant above ground to have to refine the crude helium sitting underground. which means that if you're an emerging player and you don't want to build a brand new helium liquefier from scratch, and you've got a field not too far away, you could buy that liquefier and you could use that to liquefy all of your helium. And whoever it is that bought the asset underground, the remaining helium underground, will never be able to bring it up to surface. And so that's the biggest elephant in the room right now in the United States, is that there's absolutely no visibility over the next 5 to 8 years whether the BLM is going to operate consistently and whether it's going to bring helium onshore. Then you've got Exxon going down for maintenance for over a month this year. BLM has not worked reliably. You've got the Labarge field, which is starting to dwindle. So all of this is pointing to the fact that the American supply chain of helium is in desperate short supply. We come into the room and we're in a politically sensitive area, but with money provided by the United States government, and all of this spells really good things for us, because we can get helium into the United States a lot faster than most any other country.
Absolutely. Well, Stefano, we only have a few more questions left in the audience. We only have a little bit of time left as well. So if you want to just submit your last few questions, we might just answer those. But we do have one question that just keeps popping up. I think a lot of investors are just wanting to hear, what status are we with the NASDAQ listing, and as well as the cryovac as well?
I didn't hear the second part, the NASDAQ listing, and then the second question was the
cryovac.
Okay, so on the listing, it's actually quite topical, because in exactly 20 minutes we're going to host our general meeting for the shareholder vote to vote as to whether the NASDAQ listing should go ahead or not. So in about an hour and 20 minutes time, everyone will get to see the results. But I can say so far that that the proxies that have come in, I don't think this is going to be a difficult one to get through. But the NASDAQ listing is, for all intent and purposes, I've already been out to the US on several occasions, several roadshows. We've done the testing the waters. We've already announced to the market that this is our plan and this is what we're proceeding with. We've got one of the blue chip banks on the other side over there who's going to be doing the listing for us. So all in all, things are looking really good. And obviously, the other question that I get asked a lot is, why the United States? I think that would be a pretty obvious one. The check size is pretty big. We're not going to raise that amount of money in South Africa, and we definitely won't be able to raise that amount of money in Australia. But then, more importantly, the Americans understand helium. They really do. Fundamentally, deep down, they do. They also understand LNG. And you look at the valuations that IPOs are getting on the NASDAQ. Typical transition energy companies are being IPO'd at a forward EV to EBITDA multiple. And again, EBITDA coming online, say 2027, 2028, 2029. Their forward EV to EBITDA multiples are somewhere between an average of 10, on the low side 7, and on the high side 14. At the moment, Renergen is trading at 0.3 times EV to forward EBITDA. So the Americans are looking at this and thinking, what a joke. Two exchanges have completely mispriced this. You then compare us to another South African company listed on the NASDAQ called Montauk. They had a market capitalization of 600 million rand, tiny. They're then listed on the NASDAQ. And now they're trading at a 17 times forward EV to forward EBITDA multiple. Again, their EBITDA coming online same time as our 2026 phase 2 project. Their volumes of LNG equivalent to ours at 34,000 gigajoules. They've got no helium, we do. Our EBITDA margins are significantly better. The big difference between the two companies, they're already listed on the NASDAQ and we aren't. And so as a result, they've got like a $3 billion market cap, and we don't. And it just has to do with the fact that multiples and valuations are very different in the United States, because they understand the space better than we currently are getting benefit for on these two exchanges.
And just the cryovac as well.
Cryovac, we're in discussions with a few parties on Cryovac. While we know that COVID came and went, the technology that we developed along the way with Cryovac is actually quite impressive. And so we've got two companies that we're busy talking to at the moment in terms of doing some further R&D work on it. It's not going to be a quick process. It's R&D, and you're pushing the extremes of physical limits. But we're fairly confident that the technology that we've developed over there will in time be repurposed. Again, still in the medical sector, but not necessarily for vaccines. There's some interesting and unique applications which currently what we've designed and what we've built and operated is a lot more sophisticated than what's currently out there in the market. So I'd say that's a medium to long-term project for us, and we'll be doing it along with partners who've got the R&D capabilities as well as the financial backing to be able to get it into operation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Stefano. We might end it there. We're just running out of time. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you as always attending this webinar. I know there's a few more questions being submitted at the moment. But Stefano, is there any final comments you want to say before we end this webinar?
No, listen, thank you very much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And yeah, let's see how the vote goes in the next hour and 20 minutes.
Very exciting. Very exciting. I can't wait to hear what the result will be, but I think we're all expected to be one way. But apart from that, thank you very much all for attending. This is another Jackson Securities webinar, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks, Stefano, for joining us. Catch you later.